Peer Review is a series of podcasts designed to shed light on the extraordinary breadth and diversity of talent that sit in the House of Lords. The House of Lords often gets a bad rap because it is thought to be a house of cronies and it is an unelected house. But I hope through these interviews you will see that there is this extraordinary talent, there is a great knowledge and experience, and with that I leave you to draw your own conclusions. My guest today is the extraordinary Paralympic athlete, amongst other things, Tanni Grey-Thompson of Eaglescliffe, Stockton-on-Tees. Now, there might have been a few eyebrows raised when you chose a Durham title as opposed to a Welsh title.
Yes. So what happened was when I went to sign all my forms to get my title, Galtra King's Arms sort of was quite an interesting chap. And I said to him I wanted a Welsh title, and I'm from Cardiff. And he said, "Oh, you can't have a city. That's for a duke. Where do you live?" And I told him, and he said, "That's where you're from." So I didn't know at the time that I probably could have argued a bit more for a different title.
And of course, you should really be a duchess. In my eyes, you're a duchess. I was asked in 21 when I was standing for Parliament who are the 5 women I'd like to have dinner with, and Tanni Grey was one of the 5. Queen Mother was another. Madonna, I remember that one.
Yep.
But now I have the huge pleasure of you sitting with me. And of course, you're so bemedalled. Not only did you win 11 golds, 4 silver and 1 bronze, which you must have been a bit disappointed by. I'm very disappointed you only got 1 bronze. But you got an MBE, an OBE, and were made a Dame of the British Empire. But Tanni Grey, you were born, as you said earlier, in Cardiff, and you were born with spina bifida, which is a birth illness, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm missing some of the vertebra at the back of my spine. So my spinal cord exposed. I could walk a little bit when I was young, but then as I grew, my spine collapsed, and so my own vertebra severed my spinal cord. But I don't remember anything about it. I remember walking badly, and I remember having my first wheelchair. I didn't miss a day of school. There wasn't any pain. It probably happened over about 3 years, but because it happened so gradually, I adapted to each thing that I couldn't do as I went along. So it wasn't a big deal in my life.
And you were first in a wheelchair about 6 or 7?
Yeah, about that. I don't remember. I remember having calipers and crutches, and my father, who was an architect, kind of looked at the world and said, "Look, you're not going to survive trying to walk," because I could only walk very, very slowly, couldn't carry anything, couldn't do anything. So he was the one that said, "You have to have a chair." And a lot of people told him he was an idiot. But for me, that was life-changing because I could suddenly do all the things that I wanted to do. And so for me, it was this huge sense of freedom. Now, not everyone who becomes a wheelchair user feels the same as I do, but it was amazing. So I could play sport. I could get to school on my own. There's all these things that I could do.
But how quickly could you adapt to playing sport?
So I learned to swim. Once I became paralysed, I went horse riding. I actually played a lot of sports quite badly. Wheelchair racing was the only one I was eventually good at.
Quite good at, I think.
I was okay in the end. But not as a junior, as a sort of 12, 13-year-old. I don't think anyone looked at me and thought I had talent. I had bags of enthusiasm. But it was just the fact I could get around on my own, that I didn't have to wait for somebody to help me.
But in the early 70s, it must have been very hard being in a wheelchair. I mean, there weren't the wheelchair facilities which you've been at the vanguard of achieving.
Not very much at all. There were no accessible toilets, no drop curbs, not many lifts. And also the sort of the prejudice that I think I was about 5 when the first person stopped me in the street and asked me why my parents hadn't aborted me. So, some of that,
That's a shocking question, isn't it?
Yeah, and I had people used to pull their kids out of my way saying, "Don't get too close to her, you might catch it." But my parents were amazing in that they were very level-headed. And every time that happened, they kind of would talk through with me, and they were always very calm with me. And my mum was also quite stroppy, so she just used to call them all idiots. So it wasn't my family doing that to me, it was other people.
But there's got to be something special inside you, apart from your enthusiasm and there must be something really burning inside you.
Yeah, I mean, that desire to win, it was the most important thing in my life for a very long time. And I learned at quite a young age that you've got to train hard, you've got to train smart. And it's hard to explain it, but I was driven.
So you went to Loughborough College. At that point...
University.
At Loughborough University. Probably was college then.
No.
Was it
Oh,
university?
so the reason I'm laughing is when I met Ian, the first time I was 17, he was 21.
Ian's your husband.
Yes,
Yeah.
he was doing his PhD at Manchester. And the first thing he said to me was, I hear you're going to Loughborough College.
Right.
And I very indignantly went, it's a university.
Well, of course it's a university. I wasn't meaning it into... I mean, it's fantastic sporting, amongst other things. But sport was a huge premium. Were you a sort of fully paid up athlete at that point?
Yeah, I went to...
You went to Loughborough for athletics.
I went there because Seb went there, Seb Coe.
And how did you get to know Seb? He's years older than you.
Oh, thank you. I first met him when I was at university, and I watched him on TV, and then we were at Commonwealth Games together, and there was a runner called Johnny Gray.
What, you were both performing the Commonwealth Games?
Yeah,
really.
I was sort of a bit more at the start of my career. He was sort of towards the end, and
way towards the end.
And
he's my age, Seb.
It appeared on CFAX that Gray breaks 800 meters world record, and his dad had seen it, and he thought it was an American runner called Johnny Gray. And then when he sort of went onto the page and realised it was me that broken it, I think huge relief to Peter Coe. But Seb came up to me and said, "Oh, you nearly gave my dad a heart attack." Seb won't remember it. That's the first time we actually spoke, but I'd watched him for years on TV, and had a big impact.
Amazing guy and really good bloke. So, 88, Seoul beckons. And what was the Paralympic Games like then? I mean, it must have been sort of beginners.
There wasn't a lot of coverage of the Games, and it was the first time since 1960 where the Games were held in the same city as the Olympics. We didn't really know what to expect, and
had you been travelling a lot before then?
Yeah, a reasonable amount.
So there was no problem getting on planes and going...
I've been travelling from 16, 17. And it was interesting. So the crowd didn't really know what to expect from the Games. So basically the government told people to come and watch us do sport. So the same people were sat in the same seats every day, but they supported a different country every day. And it was kind of fascinating. So, there was a bit of coverage. I mean, in terms of the competition, it was pretty strong. It was just nobody knew about it. And then after that was the first time that there was ever really any coverage on TV. Big change came for us in 92 with Helen Rollason. And she really put the Paralympics on the map.
Yeah, and you later got the Helen Rollason Lifetime Achievement Award. It was a nice full circle, wasn't it?
Yeah, and she was amazing because she'd experienced quite a lot of discrimination herself. So when she'd been given the job of presenting Grandstand, it was front page news. How dare the BBC allow a woman to present the flagship programme that is Grandstand? What will she know about sport? And, she was an incredible presenter, but also she was very keen to show Paralympic sport as sport, and you just happened to be disabled. So she really fought a lot of battles within the BBC to get us on air.
Amazing. You competed in several of the sprint classes. Which was your favourite? 100, 200, 400?
I hated the 100. It was too short.
You won a few though, so didn't
I
hate it
did.
that much.
It was always my weakest event, the 100. My strongest event would probably be the 4 and 800.
And how do you train differently for the? I mean, you imagine that 100 is totally different from an 800. 800 more endurance.
So we don't train like runners at all. We train like cyclists. So for us, there's not that much difference between the 100 and the 800, partly because you're going pretty quick. So there's a bigger difference training for marathons, but because you're overcoming momentum, not gravity, and it's like cycling, it's a bit like Mark Cavendish can do a whole range of distances and has race track and then race road. We're very similar to cycling as a sport.
You carried on relentlessly when beating all that came in front of you until I think you hung up it's not your boots, but your bicycle wheels at 2007. Is that right?
Yeah. So I knew after...
I mean, that's a hell of a long time. That's 15 years.
Yeah. I mean, it was. And I mean, I think I got to Athens, did okay there, had a bit of a mixed games, knew I didn't want to do Beijing, but wasn't ready to stop. And it was Dave Moorcroft who'd said to me when I was quite a young athlete, be really sure that you retire because you can't go back. So I did another 2 years. And I remember the 2006 season, I hated every bit of it. I just wanted to stop. But I'd said that I'd complete the season. And then I did one more race in 2007. So I retired in
And
Manchester.
2004 was your last Olympics, was it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And the difference between 2004 and 88 in terms of the audience and the crowds and things like that, they weren't paying them to come and see you.
No, I mean, people were paying to come and see us, and athletes were starting to be household names, and there was amazing TV coverage, and it was just on a whole another level. And I think each game sort of developed and moved things forward. The big, raising of the bar was London Games, which I worked on, and I mean that was just incredible.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a minute, if we may. How do you keep your fitness levels though after that point as a sort of athlete? I mean, clearly you still have to get you were wheelchair bound, so you still run around. But I saw you had a little electric machine in front of you to help you on your way.
Yeah, so I've got my electric adaptation. I use that to get around London because it's a bit quicker than relying on public transport. But it's hard. I had when I stopped.
I had visions of you coming here, full.
No, I mean, I still occasionally get in my racing chair. It's really miserable though because it's really slow and hard. So it's not a lot of fun. So I've got a hand bike, which I propel myself. I go to the gym. I do lots of other things. But staying fit and healthy is quite important. Yeah,
and it must be difficult given all the other things that you do rather than just being at it full time. So fast forward as you're about to, before I rudely interrupt you, to the London Olympics.
But it's just right from the beginning when Seb became chair of the bid, he just said, look and feel of the games are going to be the same. That's it. I remember Tessa Jowell, who'd been, instrumental in getting the UK to bid. We were in Singapore, and the night before the final bid on stage, she said to me, I want to stand on stage tomorrow and say the 60 days of the games. And everyone's told me I can't, but you'll agree with me, won't you? And I had to say to Tessa, we can't do that. Because at that point, we were only bidding for the Olympics. And the Paralympics was a separate negotiation. And I said, you can't do anything that will detract the IOC from...
Well, when you say it's a separate negotiation, I mean, they were going to be together, presumably.
They were, but you had to negotiate afterwards with the IOC and the IPC,
right? To
have them in the same city. So since London, you have to put on both games.
Yeah.
So back in
London, it was you were negotiating two things. I mean, your games could have been a totally different place. You're saying
could have been. I mean, unlikely. But Sydney, which was the 2000 games, in the early couple of years, the organising committee in Sydney didn't really want the Paralympics. And then they recognised that it was useful. So, I had to say to Tessa, you've just got to talk about the Olympics because we're bidding to the IOC. We're not bidding for an Paralympics. So, no, she was amazing. And there were just incredible people involved. But, then we had to...
And even Boris was key figure.
Lots of people,
and there seemed to be great harmony. Everyone's respecting each other's... And there was a sort of communicative endeavour.
Yeah, and then Hugh Robertson sort of came in as sports minister, and he was incredibly respectful of people who'd gone before as they were of him, and I think by the point that we're making the games happen, everyone recognised how good it was for the country. And then during games time, it was amazing. People were chatting to each other on the tube, and
amazing.
It disappeared fairly soon after. But the games makers, the volunteers, they were incredible. You still see people around.
Well, particularly the army came in and had at the last minute.
So I remember having a journalist be really grumpy with me about the army, saying, "Oh, well, it's all." I said, "But you've got a team of people who understand risk and threat and security. Why wouldn't you want them?" And for the British public, it was a chance to actually go up to them and just say thank you.
Yeah.
No party politics. Just say, thank you for what you've done. So that was. Except there was one day we did have a little bit of an issue. So my daughter, who was 10, we'd been in the park and she'd seen this mascot, which was about 3 foot high, and she wanted it, and it was £250, and it's like, you must be joking. We're not having another teddy bear, And we'd gone outside the park, and there was a sort of the same on sale for £25. So I bought it for her. We were going back in the afternoon, and one of the young lads said to her, "Do you think Mandeville's smuggling any drugs?" And Karis was like very serious, no. And then this poor he was only early 20s, he said, "We might have to cut Mandeville's stomach open." And hence my child burst into hysterical tears. I should have reacted better if he'd suggested cutting my stomach open. And this poor lad was mortified, and his mates were there going, "You haven't got kids, have you?" So yeah, every day I was in and out, he'd come up to me and apologise. He'd go, "I'm so sorry for upsetting your child." Anyway, Karis is over it now; she's fine.
But on the subject of drugs, you were then involved in 2012 in the investigation of Lance Armstrong. That must have been extraordinary.
So I got asked to join the independent inquiry.
And for those that don't know about Lance Armstrong, which there can't be many, I mean, he was the world's greatest cyclist at the time, but was a drug cheat.
And probably one of the best drugs cheats. If you know what he masterminded in terms of the microdosing was absolutely incredible. I mean, completely illegal, but yeah, I mean, that was a bizarre thing to sit on. I remember clearing out my office expecting boxes and boxes of redacted paperwork from the International Federation, and we got nothing. And so as we're going through, we're trying to investigate, it came out through United States anti-doping what had happened. So in the end, we were slightly redundant in terms of what we were trying to do. But, actually, calling time on those people are really important, because the sport rested on his shoulders. And, it's amazing how the sport sort of keeps going when you have these big crises.
Yeah. I mean, you must have encountered drug cheats in your sport.
Yeah, it happens, across all sports in terms of what people are willing to do. And, we have really good sort of policies in this country. I think we take it incredibly seriously. It still happens. But, in sport, you need rules. It's quite interesting. There's a chap in Australia who wants to run an event which is for anyone who's taken drugs, which that's getting quite a lot of media attention at the moment. I think that's going to be quite a big challenge, because of taking drugs. There might be a performance benefit, but there's also massive health detriment. So, these things come up every now and again. So, I think the rules in sport are really important.
So you hung up your boots in 2007, been keeping yourself reasonably fit since.
Yep.
And what's been, given that you've had this incredible focus in your life up to that point, and discipline, what's been the things that have really got your juices flowing since?
So a lot of the things I do now is about public transport, accessibility on trains. I mean, that for me goes back to my early 20s, being in the Lords and having the chance to be there.
And that gives you a platform for raising these issues?
In lots of different ways. So I tend to think if you write to a head of a train company on House of Lords paper, they kind of have to reply. I also use social media quite a lot for it. But I think one of the things in the Lords is that there's lots of different levers that you can pull. So whether it's asking a question in the chamber, or a question for a written answer, or tabling a debate, or just using that platform to get to the organisations to say, I think you can do better. It's actually, there's not a lot of difference between sport and politics in terms of, you've got to be quite creative. And for me, because I'm a crossbencher, I don't have that party support and backup. You have to be quite creative in finding ways to influence change. So,
and where do you research?
So I'm connected into, lots of different organisations, different groups of disabled people. You've got to always be trying to learn and develop. And, one of the things that got me to the Lords is my work in sport. So at the moment I'm chair of Yorkshire Cricket, which is right at the tough end.
You're acting chair, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm about to hand over.
I gather, yeah.
But, so for me, sitting on the outside talking about governance and safeguarding, actually to be in the middle of it doing it is also really important, because I learned from that to go back into the chamber. So, when we're talking about how you put safeguarding policies in place, you're not talking about something, that I've read in a book. It's because I've done it. So, when I went into the Lords, I was told very clearly, number one, it's a job. And number two, whatever got you there, you have to remain an expert in it. So that you're talking
That's why I never speak.
I'm not sure I'm an expert, but I have lots of people on the outside who help me, which is amazing.
On the subject of Yorkshire cricket is very topical, because we've just had a marvellous game up in Headingley. It seemed to be a sort of times a travesty of injustice, the whole inquiry, and a rather bull in the china shop stuff. to the outside observer, and sort of rather overreaction by various bodies. I mean, to the outside person looking in, what's your take on it in terms of?
Just a fundamental lack of process, and then each stage not necessarily being handled terribly well, and then everything starts spinning out of control. So I applied to join the board last year, and I've worked in sport a long time. I had a really good idea of what I was going into, and it's been really hard. You know, it's sometimes in sport, people who work in it forget that it's also a business, and you know, you've got to have a lot of things in place. So for me, what we're doing is we're putting a lot of process in place. So if there is an issue, you can raise it and something happens, and it gets dealt with in the right way. So we're putting a lot of process in place, because actually what you want is people to play cricket, have a great time doing it. You know, everyone says to me, you know, for a strong England, we need a strong Yorkshire, mostly because they know quite a lot of our good players.
They certainly are.
Which is great. But, you know, it's what I really want to do is work to develop the women's game. So
will you stay on the board, or will you?
No, I'm staying on the board. Absolutely. You know, my age, girls weren't allowed to play cricket because we were considered too delicate. You know,
my mother played. You know.
Oh, I see.
She's 93 now.
Oh, good for her. Probably had to have quite a lot of resilience.
I don't think she'd ever say that, but she, you know, she played for a better county, Lancashire, of course.
I'm going to leave that one.
So that's been a really interesting sort of almost clearing up the mess that happened beforehand. What we didn't talk about was the marathon, which has been very key to, you know, your role in the marathon, which now is this sort of huge celebration of sport, where you won it, I think, 6 times. Rather embarrassing. You must have been so embarrassed doing that.
No. I mean, it was one of the I watched it on TV when I in the early 80s, and I watched a Welsh athlete called Chris Hallam win the wheelchair race, and said to my mum, I'm going to do the marathon one day. And I think 6 years later I was on the start line, and then a couple of years after that I won it. But yeah, again, you know, just even the music, you know, when they start playing the music in the lead up to it, it kind of gets to me, because it was such a big part of my career. And I did I don't know, 85 marathons around the world, got a few podiums in other places, didn't win any other big city marathons.
Where was your favourite?
There was a race in Switzerland called Lake Sempak Marathon, which is basically 2 times around Lake Sempak, which is about 20k from Lucerne, and a wheelchair-only race. And that was by my the favourite. And I came second a couple of times and third a couple of times. And
must be quite a stampede, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's when you're having a good day, the marathon is unbelievable, because you know you're trying to break the pack up, and you know, it's again like cycling. You're doing lots of different things, and you work together with some people and not with others. And brilliant. When you're having a bad day, where you usually figure out a mile in, it is a really long, miserable way to go. So, you know, and yeah, it's one or the other. For me, it was never much in between.
No, I feel exhausted just thinking about it. I mean, you've done some really different things. I mean, you're trustee of the Churchill Memorial Trust. I chaired the other Churchill organisation, but was involved with the Memorial Trust. You were on the BBC board, 17 to 21, and you're chair of the trustees of the Duke of Edinburgh scheme, which is amazing.
I love it, DV. I never did it. My sister did, and it was life-changing for her. My daughter did it, and over the years I presented some gold awards, and you saw what it did for young people. So I joined the board, and then in 2020 I became chair. And it's about changing young people's lives. So, you know, our ambition in the next 5 years, we're going to be in 50 prisons. And we're already in a number of young offenders institutes. You know, you go into these places, you've got a group of young men who can't read, can't write, have had a really poor start life, and people have made bad choices, but actually the award is part of putting them back together. And my daughter, I'd have to say, she wasn't massively keen to do a gold award. And I'd said to her, if you don't do it, you'll be the only child of a sitting trustee in 60 odd years to not do it. Do you want to let Prince Philip down? And so she did it. And at the end, she said, "Was that true?" I went, "I have no idea."
God,
She
you must be a tyrant of a mother.
But she now recognises that it was really good for her.
And is she a great athlete? Because Ian, your husband, was a disabled athlete too, wasn't he?
Yeah, so Ian was a cyclist, broke his back cycling, couldn't ride a bike anymore, so came into wheelchair racing. Karis kayaks, but I think that's to rebel against us because I really don't like water, open water. I don't like moving water. I don't like cold water. So we will never get in a boat. We will never try it. I just have to sit on the
getting away from her mother telling her about the Duke of Edinburgh
Yeah,
Awards
it
scheme.
is. So, it's definitely rebellion that's the sport she's picked.
And where do you see the BBC going?
It's one of those things that I think because I've travelled a lot outside the UK, when you look at other public service broadcasters around the world, the BBC's amazing.
It is.
But there are lots of challenges. We're not living in the same world as we were 10 years ago, let alone when it was created. And I think it's something that we should check and challenge, but it's something that also should be cherished. So,
well, I think you're alluding to the soft power that it has through BBC World Service and through, obviously, its educational side and things like that.
And when you go around the world, the number of people who listen to the World Service, who at times of crisis put the BBC on to, because of the reporting, at its best, it's incredible, but some really big challenges, because, in terms of the internet, YouTube for young people is a massive threat because people consume news and programs in a way they didn't. When I was growing up, there were 3 channels. So it's got to be fleet of foot in terms of, I don't want to lose the best of the BBC.
No, it's a great institution and interesting with that. And then UNICEF, which you're very active with.
Yeah, so for that, I get to travel and see different projects around the world. And
where were you recently?
So the last visit I went on was in Jordan. And, going to see sports projects in other countries just, again, helps with everything that I do back here. Some great ideas, great projects in terms of just learning from how you connect locally. So, that's always very leveling when you go and see what happens and how women and how disabled people are treated in other countries, I think is really helpful.
Disabled point do you think you're going to turn around and say, tick, job done, if ever?
Not yet, not close. So the work I do on trains, the Disability Discrimination Act promised that trains would be step-free by January the 1st, 2020. The date now is 2070, so not in my lifetime. So there's still quite a bit for me to do.
The new trains must surely have these step-frees in.
No.
God.
I know.
They're not listening to you.
They're not listening. No, but you've got to keep trying, haven't you?
And where else what else is in your target site?
So it's still, there's so much more we should be doing on physical activity in terms of getting a fit and healthy nation. So the elite sports sort of looks after itself, but I'm doing a lot of work around healthy nation, and I think that's really important for us.
Does the elite sport look after itself? I mean, you hear often of big funding problems for athletics, particularly at the moment, and I'm sure there's big funding problems for disabled athletics too. Is that the case, or?
Oh, it is. And, the amount of external money that's coming into elite sport has changed. In the lead up to 2012, there was a lot of sponsors wanted to sponsor governing bodies. A lot of that slipped away. There are lots of challenges, but if we don't have a diverse group of young people playing sport, then, and we make that pathway to transition into elite sport better, we're not going to have the best athletes having the chance of competing. We'll still do all right, but we won't have the best. So for me, it's having that impact on the physical activity and they're getting into pathway that makes a real difference. And
of course, it helps for an integrated Britain too, which is partly what is happening. You're doing up in Yorkshire, presumably.
Yeah, and sport is. If we look, we've had huge success with Olympic sports, over the years since Atlanta. But the reality is, a lot of children come from independent schools. That's not just because of money; it's because of trained PE teachers at prep school level. There's lots of things that contribute to that. We kind of joke we're very good at sports where we sit down, sailing, cycling, rowing. And actually, it's just about broadening that out. Boxing, athletics have generally been a bit better at being open to everybody. So, I think every sport needs to look at itself and ask itself, is it being as inclusive as it can be? Because if you're inclusive, you've got more chance of getting better athletes through to elite level.
Mm. Well, Tanni Grey, it's been fantastic talking to you and a real pleasure. And I think the House of Lords is incredibly lucky to have you speaking on these issues. Not that we always agree on everything, but thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.